Well, the military model doesn't work in the field of intelligence.
We've got a super guest lined up for this show, Melvin Goodman. The show is going to be about the response to CIA Director Brennan's press conference 2 weeks ago, and then an appearance at the Council on Foreign Relations last week, a on-the-record interview with Charlie Rose in New York about his plans to restructure the CIA, try to bring more integrity to intelligence and make it less politicized. We're going to hear from today Melvin Goodman. Goodman is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and a professor of government at the Johns Hopkins University. He is a former CIA analyst. Melvin Goodman is the author of The Failure of Intelligence, The Decline and Fall of the CIA, and the forthcoming book, The Path to Dissent, a Whistleblower at the CIA. Goodman is the national security columnist for Counterpunch, and he said of CIA directors' plan to restructure the CIA, and I quote, "Simply, it takes the CIA further from Truman's concept and closer to the ability to politicize intelligence, operations that are part of the policy world and not the intelligence world." By the way, in the past, we've had Ray McGovern and others talk very eloquently on this subject. And we're going to have him back later in the show. The centers have made it too easy to provide the intelligence that the masters desire when they are masters of the CIA 7th floor or the policy masters. Brennan's world was the Center for Counterintelligence and Counterterrorism, and many of the intelligence errors and operational errors of the past 15 years have emanated from those centers. Organizationally, it makes no sense. What are the directorates of operations and analysis? They sound as if they are HR experts. Melvin Goodman, welcome to our show.
Thank you, John. Good to be with you again. I've had Bill Binney in my classroom. I teach at Hopkins, and also Tom Drake has lectured to my classes.
Oh, great.
And Ray McGovern and I go back about, 50 years.
50 years.
We were CIA together in 1966, believe it or not.
You know, I'm happy to call Ray a friend of mine at this point. I've been following his travails in court when he spoke out against Petraeus and was arrested.
Well, that was outrageous. He had a ticket to get into the event and couldn't even get past the front door.
Exactly. And then he's at the 92nd Street Y of all places. You know, that's supposed to be a bastion of enlightenment and culture and all good things. And here's a guy who, like yourself and a few others, Bill Binney, Kurt Wiebe, and others who just set the standard for integrity in intelligence. You know, getting arrested for what? For asking Petraeus a few questions, and he wouldn't sit down and shut up. And in the couple,
he didn't get that far. He didn't get past the front door.
He didn't get past the front door.
He was told when he appeared with the ticket that you're not getting in. And when he protested, that's when the cops were called. They roughed him up a bit. He spent the night in jail. And I think he was on the list, and obviously this, to me, is evidence of National Security Agency monitoring emails because he bought the ticket online.
Yeah.
So it was being tracked somehow.
Well, we hope that Elizabeth Murray wasn't scared of coming on this show. I don't think she was. I think she really is sick.
I know Elizabeth. I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, you know, she's a member of the same organization that you and Ray and the others are, the Veteran Intelligence.
No, I'm not in that
okay.
organization.
Now, how come you're not? They sound like a pretty righteous group of people.
I'm an independent.
Okay.
I can't sign off on every group letter that 8 or 9 people put together because it's like any other group document or consensus document. There are things you're going to disagree with, and I have my own ways of communicating my views, and I agree with a lot of what they say, but I don't agree with everything.
I see.
That they say, and I think they were wrong on the use of chemical weapons in Syria by the Assad regime.
Okay.
And I think they were wrong on the shoot down of the aircraft over eastern Ukraine, which I think Russian separatists had a lot to do with it. So I've got to be careful. I've got my own integrity and credibility to protect, and I do that by just writing under my own name for the Center for International Policy and publishing my own books. It's much easier that way.
And I'm guessing too that your that your teaching gig at Hopkins may factor into that as well? I don't know.
Not really, but I can use the classroom to bring in people like Drake and Binney and Jesselyn Raddick, who was Drake's lawyer. I'm essentially a contrarian, and it's very hard for a contrarian to get his views out there. The mainstream media isn't very friendly to contrarians. 85% of what you read in the press is what the government wants you to read in the press. So I use the classroom to sort of push some of my own ideas, and I bring in people who I think are worth listening to, just as you do on your radio show. And it's important that these channels of dissidents are kept alive because they're disappearing, and the Obama administration has gone after leaks. He's gone after whistleblowers like Tom Drake, like Bill Binney. And it's outrageous what has gone on under an administration that claims it was going to be the most transparent in history. It's been everything but.
Yeah. All right, let's get to John Brennan. What do you think of his press conference? I've also copied you on the link to his interview at the Council on Foreign Relations last week with Charlie Rose, and some notes from that interview as well. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think Brennan is an extremely dangerous person to have as a director of Central Intelligence because he has never established a record for telling truth to power. He was an executive assistant to George Tenet when torture and abuse was introduced, when secret prisons were designed, when extraordinary renditions, or what I would call kidnappings, were taking place. And a lot of the people who were kidnapped or rendered were innocent of all charges whatsoever. People never point out the fact that the torture and abuse, one, was sadistic, and two, about 25% of the people it was practiced on were innocent of all charges. So John Brennan was the wrong kind of person to put into the CIA. And when he announced his reform, and when he discussed it in the Q&A, he basically gave all of the reasons why it's the wrong kind of reform. It will centralize the CIA. In other words, it will be more susceptible to direction from above. Therefore, it'll be more easily politicized. The intelligence could be politicized. And also, he says he's using the military as his model for organization. Well, the military model doesn't work in the field of intelligence. The military model is good for a chain of command, and it's good for directing soldiers, and it's good for getting discipline on the battlefield. But in an intelligence community, you need decentralized thinking. You need people who are contrarians in their thinking. You need people who will challenge power. You can't do that in the military. I taught at the National War College for 18 years. It's a much different culture. And so when you look at these fusion centers that he wants to create, he will break down the wall that must exist between intelligence analysts and clandestine operators. And when Truman created the CIA in 1947, he made it clear that one of its major functions was to break down the worst-case analysis of military intelligence, and particularly the exaggerated threat assessments of the military. And when you heard the questions and answers in the interview with Charlie Rose, you heard an exaggerated threat assessment.
Yeah.
And this is what, to me, makes Brennan very dangerous. And when you look at the fusion centers that do exist at the CIA, they brought you things like the phony intelligence estimate of October 2002, which was the intelligence justification for George Bush's and Dick Cheney's war in Iraq starting in March 2003. And also, if you go back to Iran-Contra, which could have led very easily to the impeachment of President Ronald Reagan because it was ignoring the laws of the land, selling arms to terrorists in Iran, and then taking the profits from those arms sales and giving them to the Contras, which was a violation of the Boland Amendment, could have led to impeachment. But again, the intelligence justification for those actions came out of the Counterterrorism Center, another fusion center which combined intelligence analysts and clandestine operatives. So it's the wrong way to organize for intelligence.
Now, why isn't Congress all over this? You know, we're broadcasting here from Northern California. Senator Dianne Feinstein represents us. She chairs the Senate.
No longer. That was
that's
part
right.
of the problem.
Yeah.
When the Democrats lost the election in November 2014,
former chair, right?
Chairmanship went to the Republicans.
Right.
And now you have Richard Burr, a neoconservative from North Carolina, who's not a junkyard dog oversight chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's someone who prides himself on being an advocate for the CIA. But what I find really unbelievable is that John Brennan could announce the most extensive reorganization of the CIA in its history without briefing the Senate Intelligence Committee,
right,
without getting guidance from the Senate Intelligence Committee, with no one from the Senate Intelligence Committee, including Democrats who've spoken out against the CIA. Of course, an important one was defeated last November, and that was Mark Udall
right,
of Colorado. But you still have Ron Wyden from Oregon on that committee, and Brennan never should have been permitted to announce this extensive reorganization and now put it into play, because he's going to start it immediately, without getting any advice and consent, essentially, from the Senate Intelligence Committee. The system shouldn't work that way. When you have a secret agency inside of a democracy, the democracy must conduct oversight. That's what came out of the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s, when the CIA was breaking all sorts of laws during the Vietnam War as part of the COINTELPRO scheme. So it's an outrage that he's been permitted to even consider this, let alone announce it and put it into play.
Well, let me rephrase the question this way, Melvin. The Congress approves their budget, which is a black ops budget. You know, it's off the books, this, that, and the other thing. But they hold the purse strings. Can't they withhold funding until things like, you know, the cart goes, the horse goes before the cart, that Brennan goes before the two congressional committees, the House and the Senate, and says, here's what I'd like to do. Let me get your input.
Well, you're never going to get the majority of that committee, now that you have Republicans in the majority, to agree to withhold any money from the CIA. In fact, the CIA budget has gone through the ceiling over the past 5, 6, 10 years, starting with the global war on terror.
Talk about that.
Which is, well, it's pushed the CIA into essentially a paramilitary and military role. So they're basically conducting the drone attacks in all of the countries where we're not at war. The drone attacks in Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia can't be conducted by the military. They're conducted by the CIA. And this has led to a huge change in the CIA budget. You know, once upon a time, it was easy to figure out what the CIA budget was. I had no problem doing it, because you took the military budget, 10% of the military budget was the intelligence community's budget, 10% of that figure was the CIA budget. But that's no longer true, because you've had a doubling and nearly a tripling of CIA appropriations over this 10-year period. And what Brennan has done to make it even worse is militarize the place. The last person he named to be the National Clandestine Service Director is a former Marine colonel. Right. He's not shown any hesitancy about creating a very military organization at the CIA. And, of course, Obama contributed to this problem when he appointed General David Petraeus
right.
to be a CIA director, which didn't last very long. And then before that, you had George Bush nominating and the Senate confirming General Michael Hayden, who was responsible for the massive surveillance at the National Security Agency, a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. And that is not even discussed in his confirmation hearings to be the CIA director. So beginning with George W. Bush and continuing through Barack Obama, because he's the one who really killed off the Office of the Inspector General
right.
at the CIA, you've had a real decline in oversight and a decline in civilian control of the Central Intelligence Agency, which once upon a time was the key civilian organization in the 16-department, 16-agency intelligence community. So things are going backwards.
So your guesstimate is that their budget has tripled over the last 10 years, which would put their budget in the ballpark of what? How
I
much?
would say it would be $14 to $15 billion. In other words, it's now more than the technical collection agencies, which we know use a hell of a lot of money, like the National Security Agency
right.
and the National Reconnaissance Office and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which put the analysis of satellite photography in the hands of the military when it should be in the hands of civilians. The military cannot be trusted with strategic intelligence. They do worst-case assessments
right.
in order to justify their budgets when they go down on the Hill. And again, that's why Truman wanted a CIA, and he made it clear, outside of the policy process. And that's why right before he died, Harry Truman said, if I knew then what I know now about the CIA, I never would have created it in the first place.
Now, in
December of 1963, I have a memo that was written by Truman. I got it when I was out there lecturing at the Truman Library last summer, when he made it clear he was very upset with what Eisenhower and Kennedy had done to the CIA, pushing it into this whole arena of covert action, starting with the overthrow of a democratically elected regime in Iran in 1953. And he made it clear, I have it in his own hand. I did not want the CIA as a cloak and dagger organization. I wanted it for intelligence collection and an intelligence analysis to coordinate intelligence so we couldn't have another Pearl Harbor. And, of course, on 9/11, we did have another Pearl Harbor. But it's clear what Truman's disappointment was in terms of Eisenhower and Kennedy and their emphasis on covert action, whether it would be Iran or the killing of Lumumba in the Congo or the Bay of Pigs operation in the Kennedy administration.
So we have here a budget of about $14 or $15 billion. We've heard from other guests, very credible guests like Bill Binney and Tom Chirac, who wrote the book Spies for Hire, how 70% of all intelligence gathering is now outsourced to private contractors. How has that phenomenon in our lifetime corrupted intelligence gathering, the use of contractors?
Well, I would disagree with the 70% figure. I would apply that to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That's 70% outsourced to government contractors. But a lot of the intelligence collection conducted by the CIA is conducted by clandestine operatives. But what people don't understand, because there's a lot of mythology about the clandestine work of the CIA, they don't do a great job of recruiting clandestine sources. Most of the people, and this was true when I was at the CIA for 25 years, the people who provide information to the CIA are essentially defectors or walk-ins. They volunteer to the CIA either for money or for some ideological reason. There's very little genuine recruitment in terms of what we read about in John le Carré or Eric Ambler or the people who write so dramatically about the work of espionage. But in terms of the outsourcing that does go on, with outsourcing you lose accountability. And there was nothing so unconscionable as the outsourcing with regard to torture and abuse. A lot of CIA people wanted nothing to do with it. So they brought in two psychologists who had worked for the Air Force.
Right.
And these people gained hundreds of millions of dollars by hiring contractors to conduct the torture and abuse in CIA secret prisons. But it was a CIA officer, Jose Rodriguez, who destroyed the torture tapes, ignoring an order from the White House to protect those tapes. Don't let anything happen to them, because there were lawsuits, I think one initiated by the American Civil Liberties Union, to save those torture tapes, which would have proved how sadistic this activity was. But Rodriguez ignored all of that guidance and those orders and destroyed the tapes. And not only has he never suffered any accountability for this or any punishment, but he's been allowed to write a book that was cleared by the CIA in which he said torture and abuse never took place. I mean, the double standard. Look at what just happened to David Petraeus, the slap on the wrist, giving 8 secret notebooks to his mistress and biographer, Paula Broadwell, which had all sorts of names of covert agents in it, yet the one covert officer, John Kiriakou, who gave one name to 2 journalists who never printed the name in the newspaper, he ended up in jail for it was a 30-month sentence. I think
I wanted to ask you about that, because that really bent me out of shape. You and I both
should have.
You and I both know how this game works. Here you have Petraeus, who's got this book with the names of all the operatives in it. If that falls into the wrong hands, they're marked for kidnapping and execution. Petraeus gets a slap on the hands. So I have a question about the inequity of that, but I also have a question of the timing of that. The NSA knows everything about everybody. They know the size of your underwear, Melvin. They know what color socks you're wearing today. So they knew this about Petraeus and Paula Broadwell. Did General Alexander time this bombshell about Petraeus, and why? Why did he take him out?
Well, if the truth were told, it was rather serendipitous how they found out about Petraeus and the notebooks to Paula Broadwell. They thought, frankly, that Petraeus's computer had been hacked, because they were getting reports from this mysterious woman down in Tampa, Florida, who was hosting all of the high-level generals at the command there, including General Kelly and a few others.
Kind of like a national security geisha girl.
Exactly. Well, she had been receiving these threatening emails from Paula Broadwell, basically saying, stay away from that man, David Petraeus. And she reported these threatening emails to the FBI. The FBI goes into the computers of Paula Broadwell, and they find her relationship with David Petraeus. So no one was looking for David Petraeus. No one had given David Petraeus' name to anyone. Right. It was Paula Broadwell who brought down the House in this case.
You don't think that was a cover story?
Look at the fact that 8 sensitive notebooks, including private communications with the President of the United States, all of this had to be highly classified just by definition, and he ends up with a $40,000 fine, which he can more than cover with one speaking engagement. Yeah. And even while he's being investigated, the Obama administration still uses him as an advisor on terrorist issues and issues involving Iraq and Afghanistan. This is just outrageous. Here is John Kiriakou, again, sentenced because he gave one name to Scott Shane of the New York Times and a freelance writer. Neither one of them ever used the name, but they went after him because he's the first CIA operative who came forward to discuss torture and abuse and the sadistic nature of it. So again, the double standard. Go back to the 1990s. John Deutsch, who took all of the sensitive black operations of the CIA and put them on his home computer where he was accessing pornographic sites. Well, he was fined something like $5,000 or $10,000, but even before the fine could be paid, Bill Clinton, President Clinton, gave him a pardon in his last week in office. Sandy Berger, the National Security Advisor for Bill Clinton, was stuffing sensitive documents from the National Archives into his pants. Again, a $10,000 fine, and I think he lost his security clearance for 3 months. I mean, the outrageous nature of this double standard, it just goes on and on and on. Yet all the high-level people who leaked to Bob Woodward for his wonderful books, which I rely on, I use them in my classroom at Johns Hopkins, but no one's ever talked about going after those who leak at the highest levels of government. It's when someone lower down on the totem pole leaks that they really land on them like a ton of bricks, and particularly this administration. This administration has used the 1917 Espionage Act more than all administrations combined since World War I, and that act was passed.
Wow.
And the way they've gone after whistleblowers, Tom Drake was a whistleblower. They used the Espionage Act against him, and the case was on George Bush's desk. George Bush wouldn't have anything to do with it. It was Barack Obama who went after Tom Drake.
I asked William Binney why Keith Alexander, nothing has happened for him, for him lying to Congress. And he said, straight up that, those people are pretty much above the law. That's what it seems like.
James Clapper, he lied to the Congress about massive surveillance. And then when he was asked why he lied, he said he wanted to find the least offensive way to tell the truth. Well, it involved a certain amount of dissembling on his part. He's still the so-called intelligence czar. That's what creates cynicism within the intelligence community. And it all started when Bob Gates was confirmed as a CIA director after his politicization of intelligence and his involvement with Iran-Contra in the 1980s. So, you create cynics when you do this, and I don't think that's ever been properly understood by the American people.
So what do you see as what is the proper relationship between the CIA and the NSA, and what is it actually right now?
Well, they do a lot of covert cooperation. There are some intelligence operations that involve communications intelligence and signals intelligence where they do cooperate. But the basic difference is the CIA conducts clandestine collection of intelligence versus the NSA, which is responsible for technical and communications intelligence. But in the reform that John Brennan announced, he's creating a directorate of cyber operations. So now there's going to be, I think, even more cooperation between the NSA and the CIA, but I think they're also going to get in each other's ways. We're collecting far too much information. What the government likes to refer to as bulk collection is really massive surveillance. And massive surveillance is a violation of the Constitution. And now you have the CIA involved in it, just as they were in the 1960s and 70s during the Vietnam War, when the National Security Agency was conducting wiretaps, and the CIA was monitoring the mails, the Postal Service in the country. And I think we're back in this era all over again. It's sort of a Cold War phenomenon. And through various events, that are harder to explain, but we are back in the Cold War. And as long as we're going to demonize Putin and not understand what Putin's concerns were with regard to Ukraine and Crimea, we're going to stay in this Cold War era. And it's going to be quite costly to the American people in terms of defense spending, in terms of cooperation that will not take place over arms control or counterterrorism or important areas such as the Iran nuclear issue or Syria. But I don't see a lot of people paying attention to these things.
What did you think of the revelation over the weekend that Putin had was ready to put his strategic nuclear arsenal on alert over Crimea and the Ukraine?
Well, I thought the remarks that I saw were somewhat less threatening than that. He basically was taking credit for the Crimea operation. His popularity has gone off the charts as a result of that. The Russian people are very approving of what he's done. And he said he could have used nuclear weapons as part of the alert, but chose not to do it. My problem with Putin and why I find him so dangerous is I don't think he has any plan in terms of what he's doing. He's operating by the seat of his pants. There's no check and balance in the Russian system right now. He's surrounded himself with a few former KGB colleagues. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs know nothing about what policy plans are with regard to Ukraine or Crimea or anything else for that matter. And he's become quite unpredictable. But for the United States just to demonize him, here I agree with Henry Kissinger. Demonization is not a policy. And to allow this situation in Ukraine go on for now, it's been more than a year, without any serious contact between Moscow and Washington is simply wrong. We've got to institutionalize some kind of dialogue. These two have to get back to talking to each other. This personalization and demonization is not going to get any of us anywhere. I've talked to some of my Russian friends the last few months. The Russian people think that they're headed toward war. And I tell them, well, no one in the United States really thinks that except for some right-wingers out on the lunatic fringe. But the situation right now is out of control. And it's a very difficult thing to anticipate. What is Putin going to do next? But I think he's operating, as I said, by the seat of his pants. And so who knows what he's going to wake up some morning and want to do. He's increased flights near U.S. waters. He's increased overflights with regard to Europe. But in part, he's responding to silly things we're doing, like this exercise we're about to conduct with Estonia and Latvia. This is not the time to be doing that. You know, Ukraine is an existential issue for Russia. Russia's been invaded from Ukraine. That was Hitler's route. That was Napoleon's route. And for the United States to expand NATO in the 1990s and in the decade after that, after we promised not to do anything like that in order to get Soviet troops out of East Germany in 1990, was outrageous behavior on our part. And George H.W. Bush talked about a free and whole, but he didn't do anything about it. He basically humiliated the Russians after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Right. And now we're paying a price for that.
And besides, Khrushchev, who was Ukrainian, is the guy who gave Crimea to the Ukraine. Historically, it's always been part of Russia.
Yeah, but a lot of people think when Khrushchev did that, he was drunk. This was in 1954. It was the 300th anniversary of Ukraine, and he wanted to give them a birthday present. So his birthday present was returning Crimea. But in the return of Crimea to Ukraine, as part of the deal, the Russians were allowed to keep their naval base there for the Black Sea Fleet. That's the naval headquarters. And to keep, I think, up to 20,000 troops. So that's why Putin could say when they went into Crimea, they didn't exceed the number of 20,000, which was part of the deal from 1954. And we never read the small print in these negotiations.
Let's get back to Brennan's plan here. So he's pushing all in on cyber-sleuthing. But you and I both know that it's boots on the ground, it's the intelligence operatives on the ground who are recruiting operatives, who are recruiting informants by whatever means necessary. If you go to Mossad's model, be it bribery, be it ideological, be it blackmail, you name it, be it threats of violence, you recruit informants, you recruit your sources on the ground. How do we go back to that old school culture of intelligence officers first, foremost, whatever the CIA does? It's got to be the guys and gals on the ground as intelligence operatives, doing what they do, doing what they've always been doing, having faith in their capacity for sound decisions, and pushing decision-making down to that level as well, and not at the top of the bureaucracy. How do we get back to that old model?
Well, one of the basic problems with getting back to the old model is something that the United States does that no other country does, and that's if we don't like a country, if we don't acknowledge the sovereignty of a particular regime, we refuse to recognize it. And when you conduct a policy of non-recognition, you don't have an embassy in a country. And if you don't have an embassy, then you don't have CIA intelligence operatives, right, because they work out of U.S. embassies. I think that's mostly known in terms of people who follow international relations just about any level. So when you think of some of the real problems we have in the international arena, with regard to North Korea, with regard to Iran, with regard to Syria, we don't have embassies in those countries. Mm-hmm. So without embassies, we don't have intelligence collectors on the ground. We don't have people who are recruiting or who can be walked into, because as I say, most of the spies who work for the CIA are walk-ins or defectors. They're not really recruited in a classical sense. But you do make it very difficult to collect intelligence. And that's what we're facing in Damascus, Tehran, and Pyongyang. And we had this problem in Cuba until Obama finally realized that 50 years of non-recognition have gotten us nothing with regard to Cuba. We need to be back in Cuba if Cuba were of any significance, which it really isn't. But these problem areas like Syria, North Korea, and Iran, we don't have an embassy on the ground. Without an embassy, there's no CIA station.
Right. How would you promote the sharing of intelligence with counterpart agencies, with collaborating with partners, with our allies? What needs to be done in that area?
Well, actually, we do plenty of that.
Okay.
And it's
well, we spy on them too.
Well, but that's the way the game is played. I mean, look at the countries that spy on us, including ones that we share intelligence with. Israel conducts a lot of espionage in this country. You know, the Pollard affair from the 1980s wasn't a maverick affair.
No.
This was a legitimate espionage operation conducted by Mossad. So it goes both ways, but there's tremendous intelligence sharing, and one of the things that really angers people who work in this area is that here's Israel, and Israel gets a hell of a lot of information. In fact, the only countries that get more information from the CIA and the intelligence community are the English-speaking nations, England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. That's a special arrangement with the United States and the CIA, and they do a lot of intelligence sharing. But Israel gets a great deal of information. People talk about sharing information with Ukraine. You can't share information with Ukraine. There are all sorts of Russian espionage agents working in high-level institutions in Ukraine. We had that problem during the Cold War with France, which had been penetrated by Soviet intelligence. So there is a risk in sharing with Pakistan, for example, because there's a lot of Chinese penetration of the Pakistani intelligence services. So that's what this Hall of Mirrors is all about. It's a very difficult business.
Well, do I think that everything is being collected and is able to be viewed? It seems like it.
The problem is not the collection. If you look at intelligence failures, the collection is outstanding, particularly in the United States. The failures have been analytical failures or intervention in terms of politicization by, say, Bill Casey and Bob Gates in the 1980s. But let me show you one of the problems of technical espionage. Remember, the United States, the CIA, and Israel, Mossad, combined for the Stuxnet virus. They penetrated the centrifuge system in Iran in order to bring the centrifuge program to a halt.
Right.
I think at the time they did that, there may have been, 5,000, 6,000 centrifuges. After the Stuxnet virus, you fast forward to where we are now, Iran has 19,000 centrifuges.
Right.
So Stuxnet did nothing for us except to fight the most important campaign in cyber warfare. And I think given our own vulnerability in terms of how we depend on cyberspace more than, we tried to retaliate against North Korea and we realized we couldn't because North Korea doesn't live in cyberspace. When Obama did his nervous dance about the penetration of Sony, and I think too much was made of that in the first place. But we're so dependent on cyberspace, I think we should be very careful what kind of operations we conduct because we're so vulnerable in terms of any retaliation or response.
Do you think they have that capacity for counter cyber attacks?
In terms of the United States?
No, our enemies, be it Iran or North Korea.
Oh, I certainly do. Because
okay.
Not only does it take a state-sponsored activity, but you can take a sophisticated teenage hacker who can probably penetrate. I know when I was teaching at the National War College, the Pentagon's computers were shut down because they were hacked. That's why for Hillary Clinton, for one, on the first instance, to say she sent 60,000 emails, but all of them were unclassified. I don't know how a Secretary of State conducts business by sending only unclassified emails, but then say she was protected because she used her husband's server, which was located in her house, and therefore found it more secure than what the government could do. Well, that's just ridiculous on the face of it.
Yeah, showing a lack of knowledge for sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Hillary Clinton there. I mean, to my way of thinking, that's absurd. She has a private server. Private servers are so easily hacked. Plus, they can be, you can download all kinds of malware into them as well, spyware, etc. And now the new disclosure today is that she had aides who did not have security clearances sifting through the personal emails from the separating them from the ones related to the State Department, which were highly classified. She
claims she sent no classified mail at all. That's what I find. Of all the unbelievable things she said at that ridiculous press conference at the United Nations building, that was the most absurd.
Yeah.
60,000 unclassified emails. A Secretary of State. Ridiculous.
All right, so we got a few minutes left with you, sir. You're the brainiac here. President Obama, the next president, Elizabeth Warren, whomever, calls you into her office and ask you, how do I make the CIA better, smarter, quicker, faster? How do I add value? And your answer is what? How do I restructure the CIA?
You have to restructure the CIA in a way that demilitarizes the CIA. You have to take away that paramilitary component, which John Brennan said he was going to do when he was confirmed to be CIA director. But not only has he ignored what he said to the Senate Intelligence Committee, he's doubled down on militarization. Then you have to decentralize the place. You have to have more competition within the analytic areas, so you don't have just a command system for producing intelligence. And then you have to get the military out of the intelligence business in terms of the intelligence czar, who's, with the one exception, has always been a retired general or admiral, including the current one, General James Clapper. The military has never been a good place to go to for strategic intelligence. They're good on operational matters, and they're good on tactical matters, but not on strategic intelligence. But if you don't have people who are willing to tell truth to power, the way I learned the system, the way Ray McGovern learned the system in the 60s, and the system that really was compromised by Bill Casey and Bob Gates in the 1980s, without people of that stature who have a certain amount of integrity, nothing is going to really change the place.
And how do you integrate the analytical and operational sides?
But you don't integrate them.
You don't.
Put
okay.
a wall between
you
them.
You put a wall between them.
They don't have day-to-day contact.
Okay.
It's important from time to time for operational people to vet their sources with analytical people who can tell them, the operational people, what kind of information you're getting and if it's any good. My problem with clandestine collectors is they have a very limited view of the material they collect. They don't know how to put it into a global context of, is this information good or bad? They're just out there collecting information. It's the analyst who knows whether this is usable stuff or it's credible stuff or it's stuff that policymakers really want. So you need a certain amount of communication. But to put them in the same tent to work together when operations really are related to policy.
And how do you
make... They're doing the bidding of policymakers. And analysts have to be willing to stick their finger in the eye of a policymaker every now and then and tell them, you know, this is not the international arena that you're really working in. This policy is not going to work. That's what we tried to tell them about Vietnam in the late 60s and early 70s, but no one was paying any attention.
So you did tell them back then?
Oh, if you go back to the Pentagon Papers and look at the annexes, all of the national intelligence estimates made it clear that strategic bombing wouldn't work, that this was a civil war, that the Soviet Union and China were not responsible for the Vietnam War. But it was too late. Lyndon Johnson had already made up his mind that he was going to continue Kennedy's policy, even though I don't think he even understood the limitations on John F. Kennedy. And the other obscenity was Richard Nixon continuing a lost war so that another 25,000 Americans died while we knew that the war could never be won and we had to find a way out.
How would you make the CIA analytical function better, smarter? They've missed a lot of They've missed a lot of good analysis with nation states under threat, with subnational groups like ISIS. How do you make them smarter?
Well, I think you have to make intelligence analysts more rigorous, more adventurous in terms of going outside the conventional wisdom. You have to promote contrarians within the system, devil's advocates. You know, this was the expensive lesson that Israeli intelligence learned in 1973 with the surprise attack by Egypt in Syria. There are always going to be intelligence mistakes. As I said, if you go back to the collection was very good for the October War, for the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, for a lot of the intelligence failures. But when you allow policymakers to get involved, such as the decline of the Soviet Union in the 1980s or weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, more recently that justified the invasion of Iraq, that's when the real damage is done.
Final question, Mr. Goodman, and we so appreciate you being on the show. What scares you most today? Is it terrorism? Is it Palestinians or Al Qaeda or Hamas? Is it the global caliphate movement, or is it perhaps a tactical nuclear mistake from Russia or Israel?
Well, I don't see much chance of a tactical nuclear mistake. I worry more about nuclear weapons in the hands of India and Pakistan, neither one a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and without an established means of communication and conducting summitry at the highest level, that there could be a miscommunication, and if Pakistan had its back against the wall, it would probably use a nuclear weapon. And actually, I would say the same thing for Israel, not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but in the October 1973 war, when their backs were against the wall, in the initial stages of the war, it's not widely known, but they wheeled out the Jericho missile to show to satellite intelligence that we had and that the Soviets had that they were prepared to use a nuclear weapon against Syria if the battlefield on the Golan Heights continued to deteriorate. I think terrorism has been highly exaggerated. We're doing exactly what the terrorists would like us to do, the way we're driving ourselves nuts. We need to step back and stop hyperventilating over these aspirational designs that involve, say, the shopping mall in Minneapolis, which CNN couldn't stop reporting for about 6 or 7 days, 24/7. Right now our major problems are domestic. They're not even international. We face no existential threat. The United States has always been in a very safe position in terms of international security. We have 2 neighbors that we don't have serious problems with. We have 2 oceans. No other major power has that kind of geopolitical security that we have. We have military bases and facilities all over the world. We have power projection. No other country can do that. Yet we worry ourselves to death. Israel does the same thing with all of the military power they have, the preponderance of power in the Middle East. Yet you have Netanyahu coming to this country to wring his hands, and tomorrow he may pay a price for crying wolf too often. Because there's a very good chance that a left-of-center group is going to win that election and may even get the right to form the next government, which I think would be a just reward for inviting him over here in the first place.
Yeah, we did. That was our show last week. We had Jenna Lowenstein on. I don't know if you know her or not. She's a professor at University of Wisconsin at Madison and is the deputy director of the Middle Eastern Studies Center there, and a guy by the name of Mark Guffney on as well. Just talking about how that could have been the biggest political misstep of Netanyahu's career. All he
we'll
did.
Know tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll know tomorrow. Melvin Goodman, I want to thank you so much for being on our show. I'm thinking about spending a summer in Baltimore. I would love to audit one of your classes or sit in on one of your classes. May I?
Why in the world would you want to spend a summer in Baltimore?
Well, it's
unless
fun.
you like the Baltimore Orioles and hard-shell crabs.
Well,
anyway.
No,
let me know if you come to Baltimore.
Yeah, no, I've got a lot of reasons why I'd like to do that, but that was my birthplace, so to speak. I don't know if I've ever told. I don't know if I ever told it.
My birthplace, and not so to speak.
Well, Hopkins was my intellectual birthplace. I don't know if I ever told this story on the air, but my the CIA came to Hopkins when I graduated in 1977, and I actually went through the interviewing and hiring process. And I said to them, "Why would you want to hire me?" I said, "It seems like all you want are Boy Scouts." And they said, "Well, we mainly want Boy Scouts," and they were talking about the guys on the ground. They said, but we do take a few of another type, who's also very successful in recruiting sources. And I said, "What type is that?" And they said, "Well, the type that you are actually." And I said, "I'd like to know what type that is, because by any standard, by any standard of mine, I would have flunked your background check here. I've used drugs, I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other thing. Marine Corps service wasn't all that successful. I came back to Hopkins after 3 years, after dropping out for 3 years. I said, "Why would you want me?" And they said, "Well, because we hire so many Ratso-Rizzo types." So they balance all the Boy Scouts with the Ratso-Rizzos.
You knew your category.
That's my category. And as we were talking before the show, I went from there to Alex Brown and Sons, where I was hired by Buzzy Krongard. So I would love to meet your students as well.
Okay, just get in touch.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for being on the air. We're going to edit your comments. We send a lot of our shows in edited format to decision makers. We're going to send parts of this show, particularly as they relate to your recommendations for restructuring to the CIA, to both the Senate and House committees on intelligence, and I think we're going to send it to the White House as well. We can do that, right, Sid?
We can do that.
So there you go, and we'll send you a copy of those edited comments as well, Melvin Goodman.
Okay, thanks, John. Good to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Bye now.
Bye now.